Hey guys, it's Charles here with Metal. In this tutorial, we're going to create a space scene using Flux. We're also going to look at a few other different use cases, how you can use Flux, whether it be with flat video, tracking on footage, or using with environment maps, or using in 360 video. We're going to cover all those different use cases in this tutorial. I've seen quite a few different questions and comments from various users, and I hope to answer a lot of these questions in this tutorial. And you can see really just how you can use Flux in so many different ways. Don't forget, you guys can always download a free trial of Flux from Metal's website. I'm also going to have a project file you can download from Metal's blog of this tutorial. It's going to have all the various scenes we're going to cover and a few different files that I'm going to use throughout this tutorial. Alright guys, let's go ahead and jump into After Effects. Alright, now that we're inside of After Effects, we're just going to start out with a simple flat video space scene here with a Flux volume in it. You can see this here. This scene was really inspired by one of the Flux space scenes that Francis Chet created. Actually, a very similar technique to his scene here for the stars and the dust in the background. Those are both on solid flat layers, just using the fractal noise effect that's built into After Effects. So it's important to note that those layers, they're flat and they're not 3D, but the Flux volume here actually is 3D. However, we don't have a camera in our scene currently to see that, and you don't need a camera necessarily if you want to just rotate and kind of check out the Flux volume. And I want to go ahead and demonstrate that now very quickly, just so you can see a few different controls that are part of Flux. So what I've got here is a solid with Flux applied to it, and I've got it in a screen blending mode, just so you can see here it looks a little bit nicer on that space background. There's two ways we can rotate around our Flux volume. If we come over here to the 3D transform, this is the first way you can do that. I'm going to go ahead and toggle this down, and you can see we have a few different settings here like volume, scale, size. We have rotation, so I can actually rotate this, and then we're going to start to see kind of that 3D aspect for this volume. So every pixel of this fractal flame volume is being rendered in 3D space. There's no 2.5D or anything like that going on. So this is actually occupying that 3D space in a very similar manner to other true 3D plugins you might use in After Effects. We can also move the volume around with the position options here. I'll just move this out a little bit so we can see the entire controls. And you can see I can move this on the X-axis. And you can see the parallax differences we get there on the volume. And we can move it forward and backwards using the Z position here. And we're doing all this just on the volume itself. We don't need a 3D camera or anything like that to do this. Again, just moving it around the position. Now conversely, we also have a camera option here. So if we wanted to keyframe the position or 3D transform, we could do that as well as the camera. So there's this own kind of virtual camera built into Metal Flux. So you can see here we have a field of view option, and we have camera rotation options. So think of this like a one node camera. You can see if I go ahead and rotate this, you can kind of see how this looks like it's kind of panning across to that volume. And I can also adjust the position of it in Z space. You can see the default of it is -5. If I went ahead and put this at 0, this would actually move us right to the center of that Flux volume. And obviously this might be a little difficult to kind of tell what's happening. That's why the default's really set to -5. And now if I go ahead and just kind of adjust this, you'll see we can kind of zoom in back and forth to that volume. And this is like the actual camera's moving. I definitely want to emphasize that, not just a strictly zoom. So I'll go ahead and set this back to the -5. Now again, you may have noticed that just the Flux volume was moving, not the background, because again, the background is not 3D. Now, something else we can do though is we can actually animate around our Flux volume with the regular After Effects camera. I think this might be where some confusion kind of comes into play, but I want to show you something pretty unique when we do this. This is the way I typically work with the Flux volume. So I'm just going to right click over here and create a new camera. And I'm just going to have it be a 2-node camera, and I'm going to set it to be 20 millimeters, so it's a little bit wider, and just go ahead and click OK. And now we can see that that camera has been added to our scene. Now that camera has been positioned kind of in the center, near the center of the Flux volume. So what I'm going to do here, with the camera selected, I'm going to hit C on the keyboard. I'm just going to kind of dolly the camera back out, just so we can see the entire Space Nebula again like we had it before. And so just keep that in mind when you add a camera to a scene with Flux. The camera may position right to the direct center where the Flux volume is, and so just zoom back out. And now I'm going to go ahead and select the Flux volume, and you'll notice something kind of unique on this. The camera has now been grayed out, because the plugin recognizes that we now have a camera in our scene, and it's went ahead and grayed out those settings because they're kind of null and void at this point because we're already using this camera in our scene. Now if we go ahead and hit the C key on the keyboard again, we can go ahead and orbit around this Flux volume. And now we can kind of see the entire 3D volume of this nebula. And again, I've currently got this at the half resolution. I can move this up to full if you want, and you can see it a little bit sharper. Obviously, I recommend working at half or a third just so you get a little bit more speed and you can kind of see and work with your volume a little quicker. Now, it's worth noting you can use Flux with other 3D plugins. So right now, my stars are currently only 2D, so they don't really rotate when I move this around with the camera. But I'm going to go ahead and turn both of those layers off. And what I've got here is an Element 3D with an environment map background. So this background is currently in 3D. So if I go ahead and rotate this, you're going to see now we're using Flux in conjunction with Element 3D. And we get that parallax between the environment map in the background and Flux at the center of our scene. So you can see this looks really cool. You can keyframe this. And again, you could use this with any other 3D plugins. It's going to take up the same space and give you kind of that nice parallax with the background. And again, back on our Flux volume, just keep in mind we're using the default frame layout, which is rectilinear flat, and it's going to be just for normal video. While we're on the topic of flat video, let's go ahead and jump over here to another scene I've got. And this is an actually tracked scene. So this is some footage shot with a drone, and you can see the drone just kind of moving toward the Jeep parked right here. I'll go ahead and zoom back out on this footage. Now, I saw some comments from people that were curious if you could actually track Flux to footage, and yes, you can. So I'm going to select my shot here, and you can see I've already went ahead and tracked this footage using the camera tracker. So we have all these points on our footage, and you can see that here, and that went ahead and created a camera, and so we have a 3D camera. So in theory, because Flux occupies the actual 3D space, if we have a camera in our scene, we should be able to combine the two. So I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to right click. I'm going to create a new solid, and I'm going to make sure it's comp size. I'll just call this Flux, and go ahead and click OK. And on that solid, I'll come over to Effect, and we're going to apply Metal and Flux. Now, default, we don't see anything, so let's go ahead and use one of the presets. So I'm going to select the presets here. I'm going to select Solar Wind. And right now, this is really close up to our camera. Now, we don't actually move our camera around because it's tracked to our footage, and that would mess up our track. So what we need to do here is we need to come down here to 3D Transform, and we need to move this volume around this scene that's already been tracked. So under Position here, I'm going to move it back in negative space. Actually, no, positive space. Going to move it forward. And you can see how we're kind of moving that in the distance here. So what I'm going to do, because I've already kind of experimented with this scene some, I'm going to set the position to be 1.7. But another thing that's really good to adjust is going to be the volume size. So the size of this volume is actually quite large compared to this scene for how much the camera is actually moving. So I'm going to go ahead and scale down the entire volume size. I'm going to scale this down to something like 2 and leave it as is right there. And I'm just going to do a quick RAM preview. We're going to see a little bit of parallax movement between this Flux volume and this tracked camera. All right, so now we can see the RAM preview, and you can see that the Flux volume is actually tracked into this scene now, and it actually is 3D, and there's some parallax to it. So what we can then do is we can go ahead and reposition this some more if we want to. If we want to move it on the X-axis or the Y-axis, I can do that. So I can go ahead and just subtly move this over, and then if I might move this up a little bit. And then in this particular shot, I might set this solid to be a screen blending mode, just so it blends a little nicer with this background. And then I might come in here and go ahead and keyframe the evolution, just to add a little more movement to this. So I'm going to go ahead and set a keyframe at the very beginning of my shot, and I'm going to move down to the end, and I'll go ahead and just set this about 180 degrees, just so it's quite subtle. And I'll move back over to here. Let's go ahead and do another quick RAM preview and check out what this looks like. All right, so now we can check out this preview. You can see we're getting some nice movement on the Flux volume, getting some nice parallax where it's actually taking up again that 3D space as the camera moves past. And so this could be like a time portal or whatever we want that to be. But again, this is just a quick example of using Flux on some actually real-world tracked footage, and that you can add a Flux volume into that scene. Again, just make sure you reposition it using the volume position. You'll definitely probably want to adjust the volume size just so you can rescale it depending on how big your scene actually is. Also, again, make sure you're working in the rectilinear flat view when using it in this type of use case. All right, now let's go ahead and look at some 360 uses for Flux. So I'm going to come over to this other composition I've got here. And this is a 360 just space scene, stars and dust, kind of similar to our flat scene we looked at before. But you can see, based on the top and bottom of this image, this is an actual equirectangular 360 2:1 environment map. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And let's come over here to the Metal Globe preview just so we can see this here. I'm going to select the Metal Globe preview. I'm going to hit the tilde key at the top left of the keyboard. That's going to go ahead and make that full screen. I'm going to double click. We're going to jump into this space scene here so we can actually look around what this would look like in 360 so you can see everything's projected correctly. Look at the top and the bottom. And I'm actually going to include this environment map with the project file. So if you download it, you can go ahead and use this for whatever you want to and kind of experiment with this with the Flux as well, as we're going to do in just a second. So I'm going to hit the tilde key again to exit back out of that. And so what I want to do here, the first example I want to show with using Flux in 360, let's say I wanted to kind of add one of these space nebulas to this environment map. If I'm working on a space environment map, I want to make it more interesting, how would I do that with Flux? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a new solid. And again, we'll call this Flux. And go ahead and make it comp size and go ahead and click OK. And now we'll go to Effect and go down to Metal and Flux again. And we want to go ahead and come up here to the frame layout. This is very important. We want to change this to be monoscopic. And so this is going to be for our 360 footage. And we'll go ahead and select one of the presets here. I'll go ahead and select the same SolarWind preset. This is a nice preset to check out with 360 just because you can kind of see how it relates, because we looked at this on our flat video example. So right now this is being projected on our environment map. If we come back over here to the Metal Globe preview, if I click on it, let's go in full screen, you can see how this would look. If I'm looking around my 360 scene, we can see that that Flux nebula now looks correct. It's being projected correctly for our 360 footage. Now it's not taking up a lot of area of our 360 footage, so it may be a little difficult to tell that it is being projected correctly, but we know that it is because we're in the monoscopic view here. So what I might do, if I wanted to actually have this on my environment map, I wanted to reposition it, I come over here to the 3D transform settings, and for the volume position, I can go ahead and move this around just like we did before. We're going to see this projected now in 360, and we'll notice it a lot more if I move it up to the top and bottom. And you can see how it's actually moving the entire volume. It's not just moving it around this environment map, so you can see how we actually have a little bit different view of that nebula. So we might need to rotate that as well. So if I come back over here and kind of rotate this, and we're going to try to rotate it back to a similar view it was before. Now we can see we've rotated that, and I'll go ahead and move it up a little bit more. And I'm going to go ahead and resize this so it takes up a lot more room, and so we can kind of see that 360 projection. So you can see how this looks now on our environment map. If we come back over here to the Metal Globe preview, and we look at this, we can see it is being projected correctly. We don't have any seam lines or anything like that. But again, this would be a use case if we're adding this to an environment map or something of that nature. However, we can also use Flux for texturing. So let me go ahead and just kind of show you how that might work. So what I'm going to do here with my volume rotation and everything, I'm just going to go ahead and reset this. We're going to go back to the default. So I want to go ahead and change this now to be monoscopic again because the default is flat. And I'm just going to go ahead and select that preset we had, the SolarWind preset. And I'm actually going to come down here and I'm going to turn off those stars, that environment map. What I've got here is just another solid layer, and I've applied the VR fractal noise effect to this. This is spherical fractal noise, very good for creating textures or planets. And that's kind of what we're going to do here with Flux. So if we come back over here to the Metal Globe preview, let's go ahead and make this full screen again with the tilde key. I'm going to double click and exit out of that. So we're looking at this from this kind of outer view. So you can imagine this is like our texture we're making, or you can imagine this as our planet. Now right now Flux isn't covering up the entire planet, so this might be something you would want if you just want it to be on part of the planet. But what we want to do is I want to make this be on the entire planet, kind of like an aura engulfing the entire planet. So what I would do in order to do that is I would just come down here to the Flux, plug in, and I would come down here to 3D transform. And if you remember, I'm going to go ahead and actually close that up on the camera options here. It's at -5. So if I go ahead and set this to 0, it's going to move that Flux volume forward. So now we can see it's completely encompassing kind of our 360 camera in a sense. We have the front, we have the back, top, bottom. So it's all engulfed now by the Flux volume. That's what we're seeing reflected here. And I could actually go ahead and animate the evolution if I wanted to, or whatever else I want to do to kind of change how this looks. And I'm going to do that just a little bit here. And I may even adjust the rotation just so we can get a little bit different look on this. So now we can kind of see what that looks like. So if we come back over here to our Metal Globe preview, I'm going to go ahead and make that full screen again. Now we can see that texture that we've applied kind of to this planet, where it almost kind of looks like a fire planet now. And we have these kind of like solar waves coming off of this. But again, this would be an example of using it for texturing if you're wanting it to be an entire kind of 360 map. I'll go ahead and change this to be a full screen resolution just so we get a little bit more detail on things. You'll see as this goes through. Now we can see we have a little bit sharper lines and just finer details. And then a quick way you can change the color if you wanted to. If you don't want to go through here and manually adjust all the different mutations, I would just select your flux layer, come here to Effect, and under Color Correction, come down here to Hue and Saturation, just adjust the master hue, and you can quickly just kind of shift the colors of everything if you wanted to kind of change the tone of this planet, maybe to something like a blue planet. And you can see if we come back over here, now we can kind of see that spherical texture we've created, and obviously you could animate this with the evolution. And of course you could also use this not just for your planet, but you could use this as a nice environment map as well. So let's actually go back over here to the Metal Globe preview. And I'll just double click and jump inside. So now we have this really cool kind of aura sky map that we created here, just by centering the flux volume over the kind of our 360 projected camera there. And again, if I didn't want to have that there, I would just come back here to the camera settings, making sure the frame layout's on monoscopic, and just dial this back to -5. And we're going to see that shift back. And now we can see the volume there. I'll change this back to half. And I'm just going to kind of zoom in and out with this, and you can kind of see how this kind of encompasses the camera. Again, giving you some really nice texturing on this. And what's great, again, because these are true 3D volumetric fractal flames, again, every pixel of this is in 3D space. That's what allows us to not have those seam lines, because none of this is 2.5D. So you won't run into any errors like that, and you can really, pass directly through these volumes, either in this view or with a other 3D camera rig in After Effects, and you're typically not going to have any seam lines. I've yet to see any myself with the 360 renders that I've done using this plugin, so that's really nice. Now finally, one other 360 example I want to show you, and that's going to be tying it back to our original scene. So I'm going to come back over here to our space scene, and again, this is flat, normal video, but because Flux is actually in the 3D space, we could actually export this scene as 360. So sometimes, or actually a lot of times, it's going to be much easier to design a scene in the flat rectilinear view like this, and then go ahead and output that scene in 360. So just to refresh what we have in this shot, I have a solid here with Flux on it, I have a 3D camera, and I have an Element 3D layer here in the background with that environment map. Now you don't actually have to have this for this. I'm going to go ahead and leave this on just so we can kind of see this a little bit simpler. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit C on the keyboard. We're going to rotate around this. So you can see we have our scene. So let's say I wanted to fly right through this Flux Nebula and export this entire scene in 360. How would I go about doing that from this point? Because we've designed all this, again, in this rectilinear view. So what you need to do is come over here to the VR Comp Editor. If you don't see that, you can launch that from the window there. This is built into After Effects now. And what we need to do is we need to select Add a 3D Edit. And when we select that, we're going to see the 3D Edit options. It's going to ask us to select a composition. This is where it gets a little tricky because we actually want to select a blank composition. We don't want to have any right now. And we want to go ahead and come down here to the camera settings. We are going to use a 2-node camera. And I'm going to go ahead and turn on use a 3D null camera controller just because I find that to be a lot easier. And finally, under advanced settings, we are going to be using 3D plugins. So I'm going to check that on as well. Now let's go ahead and select Add a 3D Edit. Now when we do that, we're going to see we're currently working in our edit view and we don't see anything, but that is correct because we selected blank. So if we come over to the VR master, you're going to see Edit 1 and go to Properties. And let's go ahead and select Import a 3D composition that we already have created. So I select that. And we're just going to select our space scene, and that's the scene we've created with Flux in the flat rectilinear view. And we're going to go ahead and import that 3D comp. So now when we do that, we're currently looking at this again from our edit view. Let's go ahead and go over here and check Open the Output Render. When we do that, it's going to go ahead and kind of purge the image cache and give us now a 360 view of that scene. So as you can see here, we're currently dead center of the Flux volume. So that's why we kind of have all these streaky lines everywhere. So let's go back here to the Edit 1 view. And what I want to do here is I'm going to go ahead and select that VR Master Camera Controller. I'm going to hit P on the keyboard for position. And let's go ahead and just pull this back out quite a bit. And you can see when we do that, we're pulling away from the Flux volume. I'm going to set this to half. And I'm going to hold Shift as I zoom back out here, just so we can zoom out pretty quickly. And you can see now we're actually working with this in 3D space. So I'm going to go ahead and create a keyframe for position right here. And we're just going to very quickly fly through the Flux volume so we can see this projected in 360. So we're at -3000. Let's go ahead and hold Shift, move this forward, and you can see we're going to fly through the Flux volume and come back on the other side. And let's go ahead and now open up the output render. And this is going to quickly refresh based on our scene changes. And I'm going to go ahead and do a quick RAM preview of this. I'm going to zoom in here to about 1 second. And let's do a RAM preview of this, and we're going to see that entire 360 scene projected now. I'm going to set this to half. Now you can see we're flying directly through that flux volume in 360. So we can go ahead and export this now, and you can upload it to YouTube or Facebook, and this will be an actual 360 video flying directly through this flux nebula. And again, this is just another use case for Flux in 360. If you make a scene in the normal flat rectilinear view, you can always still just go ahead and use the VRComp editor and export that scene to be 360 because, again, this plugin is working in 3D volumetrics. All right, guys, hopefully you picked up a few tips for using Flux in all these different ways, whether it be flat video or 360 or tracking onto normal flat footage. Again, one thing I like to do a lot is use this for creating different environment maps or creating textures. So there's all kinds of different use cases for Flux. Again, you can always download a free trial of Flux from Metal's website, and make sure you download the project file that will be on the blog post for this tutorial on Metal's website. Again, because I'm going to include a few different files that I use today in that project file, and you can dive in there and get a lot of different use cases out of that. All right, guys, it's been Charles Yeager with Metal. Thanks for watching.